The morning light on Nexus Prime always looked artificial, even when it wasn't. It slid across the veined marble of the Triune Compact's assembly chamber in a way that had been engineered. Angles calculated for grandeur, for permanence, for the sort of quiet that tells everyone the rules have already been decided. Envoy Thales of the Verdiminian stood beneath the chamber oculus, 4 thin arms spread in ceremonial geometry, and spoke into 1,000 years of precedent. Esteemed delegates, they said, voice translated into 100 tongues at once, we address the accelerating danger to order. The humans have violated 19 boundary compacts and established 103 unlicensed settlements inside compact space. Their vessels travel armed. Their colonies fortify. Their presence is disorder. Behind Thales hovered holoprojections of red-limbed star maps, the kind of cartographic theater that let an observer believe lines on a wall could outvote gravity. The murmur through the benches had the tensile sound of consensus. On Earth, 1,000 light years and a heartbeat away, President Maya Reed paused the transmission. The Situation Room under the rebuilt Capitol was all dark steel and glass, screens reflected in the eyes of the people she trusted to tell her when the sky was falling. Admiral Jonah Hale, fleet comm, leaned forward, scarred hands folded like a taught lesson. Dr. Noor Al-Kindi, civilian advisor for xenoethics, sat beside him with a legal pad that made her seem anachronistic on purpose. They filed the ultimatum last night, Hale said. 72 hours, vacate all border systems, dismantle the gates, submit to compact arbitration. After 9 months of talks and 5 draft trade accords, Reed replied, the last one with joint survey rights and reciprocal port treaties. They don't hear bargains, Noor said, tapping her pen against the paper. They hear challenges. They are old. We're fast. That's the tension Clausewitz wrote about. When politics fails, war clarifies the conversation. The question is who chooses the grammar. Reed breathed slowly. On the main screen, Thales was still speaking, now with the phrasing of threat disguised as law. And so, by unanimous assent of 12 signatory species, the Triune Compact demands immediate human withdrawal from disputed regions. 72 standard hours, after which compact enforcement will proceed. Proceed, Admiral Hale echoed softly. He had the kind of voice that made bombs sound like weather forecasts. They mean a demonstration. Reed resumed the transmission and let it run to the end, where ceremony curdled into applause. Then she turned to a different window, a live feed from Elysium Ridge, a cobalt-green world in the Caroline swath. Children running under lavender-leaved trees. A teacher trying to keep them corralled for a field trip. Her aide's hand hovered over the controls, waiting for permission to cut the feed. Reed didn't grant it. Protocol Mirrorvale is staged, Hale said. Evacuations to sub-horizon shelters are underway. Gate traffic is disguised as commercial drift. Stealth patrols are dark across all contested vectors. We ash the transponder network. If they come, they'll find no formal target. Noor set her pen down. Maya, when the first stone falls and the instinct is to return it, remember, revenge simplifies, but justice outlasts. We'll be tempted to show them what humans can do. We should show them who we are. On Nexus Prime, the chamber recessed. On Elysium Ridge, the afternoon bell rang. On a Verdreadnought named Sensors Poise, High Marshal Jar prepared the lesson Thales had promised. They arrived with the geometry of a textbook. 3 battle groups in nested spheres, line ships at 90-degree offsets, drones in a lattice that shouted confidence. Human orbitals looked dormant on long-range scans. Human ships weren't there at all. Observe the forms, Jar said to the bridge crew as if they were students in an academy. We will teach obedience by restoring memory, amplify transmission. The beam fell with the clinical indifference of physics. In the space of 6 hours, Elysium Ridge's cities became smears. Water boiled, atmosphere burned. The lavender trees turned into albedo and steam. Earth watched. The feeds were everywhere because the compact meant them to be. War as pedagogy, punishment as pedagogy, the marble floors of 1,000 halls applauding the lesson. In the silence afterward, Reed stood with both hands on the back of a chair as if feeling for the ground. Hale didn't speak. You didn't speak in the seconds where words would either be inadequate or unforgivable. Reed finally said, "You can betray a treaty, you cannot betray a grave." Nor closed her eyes, said a prayer Reed didn't recognize, and opened them again. "What do we say to our dead? We say we will not let them be curriculum," Reed answered, each syllable steadier than the last. "Admiral," Hale straightened. He knew the order already, knowing it and hearing it were different sacrament. "Execute Mirrorvale." Across the disputed span, colonies vanished from registers. Supply lanes turned into empty vectors. Merchantmen dipped into shadows and did not come back out. To the compact, it looked like a species conceding under superior force. To the species in question, it was the quiet before the door creaked open. That night, Reed recorded the only message she intended to send to Jar. It was audio only. "You mistake restraint for weakness and process for permission. You think we will fight like you do because you cannot imagine another grammar. We have been arguing with the universe since we learned to stand. Now you will learn to listen." She sent it. Then she stood at the window and watched dawn climb over a river named for a man who once dared to cross a boundary and change history's tense. Marble meant to look permanent glowed in very human light. Behind her, the room hummed. Below, trains stitched a continent together. Above, a relay picked up her words and hurled them into the dark, where a nation old as stone believed it had taught a lesson and would soon learn the cost of teaching the wrong one. The feed from Elysium Ridge kept playing on a side screen until someone, Reed never knew who, finally turned it off, nor left the small legal pad on the table when she followed Reed out. On the top line in neat script, she had written, "Thucydides is not a prophecy, it's a warning." Captain Imani Osai had spent a childhood measuring silence. She was the daughter of a Ghanaian linguist and a systems engineer from Nevada. She grew up with code switching at the dinner table and code breaking in bedtime stories. When she joined Fleet Intelligence, she discovered the pleasure of other people's overconfidence. When she took command of the stealth corvette Hush Harbor, she met the kind of quiet that changes wars. On her screen, of her patrol flotilla moved in parade formation, broadcast pings shouting, "Here we are," with the arrogance of tradition. Their doctrine assumed honor demanded visibility. It made their ships beautiful and predictable at the same time. "Lead destroyer's reactor balance is sloppy," her tactical officer said. "They calibrate under load, not ahead of it, because their manuals say the world will wait," Osai murmured. "Remind them it won't." Two quantum shear torpedoes slipped from Hush Harbor's prow and then ceased to be in any way a sensor could admit. They re-entered the universe inside the reactor housing of the lead destroyer, which promptly suffered an accident so ordinary that the flotilla's first response was to scold its crew. "Instructive," Osai said. "Mark the time delay between explosion and command acknowledgement." 8.2 seconds, the tactical officer answered. "Their OODA loop is carved in stone. Then we'll draw in ink." In Luna's subcrustal labs, Dr. Elena Vasquez had a bench covered in alien artifacts. Some were marvels, plasma lathes that danced iron into lace, precision fields that wore the density of a mountain like a coat. Some were jokes, authentication protocols that used the same initialization vector for family, military, and government channels, as if ceremony could replace math. "Entropy is immoral," she told her team, partly to be funny and partly because she meant it. "They think encryption is a costume for status. We think it's an argument with chaos. Guess which philosophy wins?" Lieutenant Sora Kim, an analyst with a habit of noticing the wrong things first, looked up from a spectral graph. "Their key schedules repeat when the senders use honorific titles. It's an out-of-band pattern. Every time they add high or exalted, the pad increments predictably." Vasquez blinked, then laughed so hard a wrench clinked to the floor. "Ego as side channel. Get me a patch for Fleet Comm in 10. By the end of the day, human operators reading compact channels felt like eavesdroppers at a very old wedding where the vows had calcified into passwords. Admiral Hale did not smile. He had the sort of face that held grief in escrow and paid it out slowly. "We will not broadcast that we can hear them," he told his planners. "We will simply anticipate them and let them learn the difference between fate and failure." "Mirrorvale Phase 2, said Colonel Tran from Psi Ops. "When they tell a fleet to turn right, we will place an accident on the right. When they warn a planet about sabotage, we will detonate an old pipeline we seeded 6 months ago. No fingerprints. Every lesson they trust will start lying to them." Nor listened from her usual chair, legs drawn under her as if she were cold no matter the room. "Do it," she said quietly, "but do not forget there are people on the other end who do not write orders and do not carry guns." Reed glanced at her. "We don't forget. We remember Elysium Ridge, and Aleppo and Kigali and Srebrenica. Justice that refuses history becomes vengeance pretending to be clean." The first week of ghost arithmetic, the term a junior operator coined and that stuck because doctrine must earn its poetry, looked like failures of maintenance. A compact convoy vanished near the Bitterline Gate, but the logs showed thruster recalibration gone wrong. A supply depot on Seraphin burned, but the video caught a spark that might have been dust. A reconnaissance wing in the Hecate Vale failed to report, but the comm relays were known to be faulty in that region. By the second week, High Marshal Jar convened an emergency session of the Strategican. Holobusts of the 12 signatory species wavered above a dais meant for triumphs. "These are coincidences," said a jurist chair, segments of its chitin clicking in legal nervousness. "The humans are hiding, and cowards die by their own fears." Jar watched a map that looked increasingly like a bleeding nose. "Coincidence is a statistic. This is a function. We are being cut." Envoy Thales requested more demonstrations. "When a beast bites, you break its jaw. Beasts don't read your council minutes," Jar snapped. "They adapt." He slept in his uniform that night and dreamed of school, of a teacher chalking axioms in a room with a window that wouldn't open. On Hush Harbor, Captain Osai trained her crew in the ethics brief she wrote herself. Rules of engagement sat as lines at the top. No strikes on civilian targets. No cascading sabotage in life support systems. No biologicals. No star-kill devices. She made her weapons officer repeat each clause until it sounded like habit. "We could end this faster if we burned whiter," the officer said one late watch, eyes rhymed with insomnia. "We could end the world faster the same way," Osai answered. "We're not here to simplify. We're here to survive with our reflection intact." Some nights, alone in her cabin, she took out the picture of her sister in a field of lavender trees on Elysium Ridge. She did not cry often. She preferred to count. Torpedo loads, fuel, days since the fire. When the next patrol group died in 6 silent seconds, Osai did not enter a log about revenge. She entered mass, velocity, a vector diagram, a note about reactor slop. Later, when the rumor spread through the fleet that she was keeping a running list of compact ships she had spared when she could have killed them, no one asked to see it. Sometimes rumors are true because they should be. Back on Earth, Reed recorded a second message to Jar and did not send it. In it, she talked about Athens and Sparta and the trap of thinking the future owes you your past. She quoted Lincoln badly and Sun Tzu better. She deleted the file. War teaches economy. The third week, the compact finally noticed their orders were arriving at human convenience. They tightened their channels. They added more honorifics. Somewhere under Luna, Lieutenant Kim smiled the quiet smile of someone whose childhood had taught them to hear the music in other people's pride. The accidents kept happening. The universe started to look like it had a sense of humor humans understood better than their enemies did. And because human planners had studied not just weapons but psychology, their broadcasts began. Not taunts but receipts, coordinates, timelines. A calm voice over unsecured frequencies reciting the names of ships as they vanished, paired with the names of children lost at Elysium Ridge. Not to say we did this, but to say you taught this class. The compact turned down the volume. Noise got in anyway, the way truth does when it is less a word than a weight. In the Strategican, Jar said nothing when a junior officer suggested another demonstration. He remembered the chalk, the window. He ordered reconnaissance and got ghosts. Honor, Thales said, requires we respond. Survival, Jar answered, requires we learn. He wasn't yet certain which verb the compact had sworn to, and he suspected the difference would be paid in the only currency that cannot be minted again. The first time two compact fleets fought each other, it happened in the Syrinx corridor. Admiral Varys received an authenticated directive, stamped with the highest seal, to interdict a human incursion pouring from the corridor's far end. Admiral Kothel received an equally pristine directive to destroy a compact formation rumored to have defected after human bribery. They met in the dark like actors summoned to the wrong stage and unrolled their banners at one another with perfect faith. Confirm the cipher, Varys said calmly. Confirmed against Prime, replied their comms officer, gills pulsing with confidence. Open the guns. The battle lasted 4 hours and ended with 2 command ships venting a fog of vaporized heritage. The surviving captains sent inquiries upward. The answers they received were silence and later, reprimands for insubordination. The reprimands used honorifics in all the old places. On Earth, Operation Trojan Chorus received a blue-ink checkmark from Admiral Hale. Elena Vasquez, who had long ago learned to admire an elegant hack the way composers admire an elegant chord, simply said, "They built a cathedral of bureaucracy. We learned to sing in the narthex." "It won't work forever," Lieutenant Kim cautioned. "They'll randomize. They'll consult by analog. They'll switch to couriers." "It doesn't have to work forever," Hale said. "It has to work like weather, long enough that people begin to plan under it." In the Vega yard, a world-sized cradle for ships, Captain Elias Stone of the stealth frigate Arcadia's Edge watched nanite pollen drift into intake valves as delicately as a summer's dust. He'd spent his childhood in Iowa, watching combines eat horizon. The sight of small things doing large work had always pleased him. "We can collapse their production by 20% in a month," his science officer reported. 40 in 6 weeks. In 3 months, every ship they launch will carry failure in its bones. "Nothing in life fails as honestly as a rushed weld," Stone said. "Teach them." He hesitated at the sealed case bolted to the deck, a biological package labeled Daybreak, secured under 3 locks and 1 prayer. He ran a palm over the hard corners and left it shut. Some victories make the map smaller, some make the species. Psychological operations ran parallel with the stealth war, never quite touching it but always adding weight to its push. Human broadcasts stitched together footage of compact councils condemning the bombing of civilian sites, other people's civilian sites, other people's funerals. Quotes about honor from half a dozen species played over starfields and faces. Reed authorized a series of addresses to the peoples of the compact that sounded like commencement speeches rewritten for a planet on fire. "You were taught that law is what the old say when they have forgotten what the young can do." She began one, the way she used to begin talks to first-year law students. "You were taught that obedience is safety. Look at the map. Is it safer now? Look at your leaders. Are they learning?" Nor read every script. She crossed out a sentence that sounded like triumph and wrote mercy scales better in the margin. Reed left the note intact and the sentence erased. High Marshal Jar met privately with Envoy Thales and 3 other figures whose names were carved into pillars on worlds most humans would never see. "We go to ground," Jar said. "We consolidate in the core. We stop telling the enemy where we intend to be. We relearn logistics as if roads had to be built each morning." "That cedes the frontier," Thales said. "We look weak." "We are weak," Jar answered, an honest piece of treason. "Strength starts when you admit the number you are adding is smaller than the number being added against you." He ordered a blackout on ceremonial titles in military traffic. Somewhere under Luna, Lieutenant Kim shrugged, wrote a new parser in 15 minutes, and went to get coffee. The Prometheus program. The kind of name that sounds like hubris even when it is only half accurate. Completed live fire testing in the Ptolemy deltas. A single frigate flickered in 2 places at once and became a smear of probability until the moment it chose a target. Then it became a verdict. We are playing at the edge of what we know about causality, Vasquez said in the briefing, wearing a tired sweater and the face of someone who has looked into an equation long enough to see her reflection move. Use it sparingly. Not because we can't build more, but because you cannot build a civilization out of exceptions. Hale nodded. War had taught him to save his best tools for the place where the line is about to break. One demonstration, he said. Make sure they understand that the door we're knocking on is one we don't want to open either. The target was a compact command lattice in the Origi Reach. The effect was surgical, obscene, and very, very clear. 12 ships became artifacts in under a minute. Their black boxes broadcast clean telemetry. Human channels went silent afterward by design, as if embarrassed to have revealed a thing. The choir of false orders swelled. Compact units arrived where no enemy was and left where enemies were. Fuel went to ships that had been scuttled. Ammunition went to a choir of signatures that were only echoes. And always under it the accidents. A reactor that refused to synchronize, an airlock that stalled on open, a coolant line that knew fatigue better than its designers did. In the Strategicon, Jar put his hands on the table and said, "The laws we wrote for ourselves assumed honor kept war symmetrical. Humans have built a grammar where asymmetry is the only conjugation. We must decide whether to learn their language or die speaking ours." "What of civilians?" asked a voice that had not spoken in 3 sessions. It belonged to a humanitarian minister who had aged 2 decades in 2 months. "They flee, they starve, your chessboard is made of homes." Jar's eyes closed. "I know." He did. He also knew that when a house is on fire, lessons about architecture feel like cruelty. He drafted a message to read and deleted it. He drafted another to Thales and sent it. Call the conclave, ask for mediation, offer the frontier, keep the core, a compromise that looked like a map and smelled like surrender. Thales replied with a single line, "We do not kneel to beasts." Jar turned in his chair and looked at a window that wouldn't open. On Earth, Reed was briefed on a device code-named heliotrope, a way to push a star into a long winter, not a death. Just a dimming, a reminder that physics remembers insults. She read the summary twice. She did not sign. "Every tool we test rewrites us," Nor said afterward, hands around a cup of tea she never drank. "The question isn't does it work, it's who are we after it works." "Who we must be," Reed said, but her signature line stayed empty. The choir sang. The ghosts counted. The map began to look less like marble and more like river, carving, patient, inevitable. Power changes fastest when it is too proud to admit it is changing at all. Jar prepared for a war he no longer knew how to describe. Part 4, Terms of Surrender and Other Difficult Grammar. By the 4th month, the Triune Compact held the core worlds like a person clutches a wound. Refugees piled into orbits until they looked like rings. Grain ships lined up at jump gates and waited for permissions that used to be automatic. A rumor, harmless as salt, corrosive as salt, spread through 10 systems. That the humans were everywhere and had been for years, selling brighter lights and better harvesters and tiny seeds of treason in their words. On Earth, the Colonial Council convened under a skylight that framed a triangular patch of sky. Reed listened as Admiral Hale laid out red markers for human stealth groups slotted around each core world like commas. "We can end their fleet capacity in a synchronized strike," he said. "We can also prevent them from starving. Both plans fit in the same envelope. The difference is which page you sign." "Open the envelope," Reed said. Psi-Ops proposed Operation Lantern's last act. A broadcast in the Compact's 12 languages, voiced by 12 human speakers who had spent a year learning vowels properly. It contained no taunts. It contained the terms. They were severe and clear. Immediate cessation of hostilities. Disarmament of all capital ships. Trials for military commanders who had ordered or supervised strikes against civilians. human and alien both. The list already held names from both columns. A mandated buffer of uncolonized systems between human space and the compact's core, patrolled by mixed councils. An independent relief authority, staffed by third-party species for refugee management. A prohibition on orbital bombardment codified into a treaty with triggers that would make any violation feel like sticking a hand into a live engine. Imperialism with a lawyer's haircut, one senator muttered, nor heard and did not smile. Restraint is not imperialism, it's engineering. Bridges stand because we tell ourselves no more often than we say go. Reed recorded the address herself. She did not practice. Practice would make it sound like an advertisement. To the peoples of the Triune Compact, she said, and the translators adapted her English into 12 grammars with care. You think you know us. You saw us build fast and guessed that speed is a lack of patience. You saw us argue loudly and guessed that we cannot listen. You saw our dead and guessed that we must want your dead to balance an ancient ledger. She paused not because the script said to, but because breath is the only human punctuation that matters. You were wrong. We want order, but not the order of marble and ritual, the order of consequences. We will not accept a world in which civilians are curriculum. We will not accept a map that lets the strong build ethics that fit only their hands. You demand honor. We demand justice. Terms are attached. They are not negotiable. We will not starve your worlds. We will not burn your suns. We will, if forced, end your fleets. She ended it there. No slogans, no flags. The Strategican received the message along with every station and kitchen and barracks in the compact. There was no applause in the chamber where Jar stood. There was a sound like an old house settling. Envoy Thales read the terms and felt something break that pride had held together. They mean to rule us with rules, they said thickly. It's an uglier tyranny. Perhaps, Jar said, perhaps it is also survivable. A vote was called. The Hawks spoke of beasts and bones. The pragmatists spoke of children and winters. The humanitarian minister remembered a factory airlock that had jammed when refugees tried to pry it open and chose. The vote failed by 2. Pride, like gravity, is persuasive. That night, a war faction launched an unauthorized strike on a human relief convoy bound for the Iris Belt. 3 freighters died before the escort could answer. Captain Osai, who had signed every ROE clause with her own blood metaphorically, if not literally, destroyed the attackers with surgical anger. She then burned her way into their logistics node and found documentation. A plan the war faction had named Sable Crown. A Starkill device wrapped in ritual, the sort of theology that uses math to make itself feel modern. She sent the packet to Fleet Com with a note tagged High Priority and Higher Shame. It arrived on Reed's desk 10 minutes before a briefing on heliotrope. Reed read both and sat with her fists under her jaw like a tired boxer listening for the bell. They will escalate, Hale said, and they will call it salvation. We all do when we're losing, Nor said softly. That's why losing is dangerous even for the winners. Reed looked at Heliotrope's signature line again, then at Osai's packet, then at the wall where someone had hung a photo of Elysium Ridge before. Children under lavender trees, a field trip, a bell. Draft a response to Sable Crown, she said, to the people, not the generals. 12 scripts, 12 names. Send the plans we captured. Redact only what lets copycats build more quickly than conscience can catch them. If they see what their saviors are willing to do in their name, some will take the pen out of those hands. Psy-Ops wrote through the night. The broadcasts hit in the morning like weather finally turning. On 3 worlds, riots began not against humans, but against the war faction's headquarters. On 2, command staff resigned and requested counsel from neutral species. On 1, a destructor rig was dismantled by a crowd that contained engineers, priests, and most lethal to zeal, grandmothers. In the Strategican, Jar stared at feeds of his own people storming an archive and felt something he'd fooled himself into thinking he no longer had. Hope that did not require someone else to die to exist. He called Envoy Thales. Call the conclave again. Thales's voice was thin. It will fail again. Then let it fail in public. Reed received the request for mediation on an afternoon full of small, good noises. A printer 3 rooms down, rain starting over the Potomac, Nor's pen scratching through another clause too clever for its own ethics. Reed agreed to attend in person. Hale objected on principle, and then wrote a plan that would keep her safer than a person elected by a species should ever need to be. As the human delegation prepared to depart, a courier rushed a data wafer into the room with the panic of someone who had been told they were now responsible for the rate of history. "From the Cyclades relay," he said. "Priority Alpha, it's a new signature. We don't recognize the math." Vasquez put the stream on the wall. Numbers unfolded across the screen like a note written by a hand that didn't care whether the reader could weep. It was not heliotrope. It was not sable crown. It was something older and newer at once. "It's a starquake induction," Vasquez said, throat dry. "Not a kill, a warning. Someone, maybe ours, maybe theirs, has figured out how to make a sun ring like a bell." "Who?" Hale asked. Vasquez shook her head. "The math is clean and anonymous. It could be a human cell running ahead of orders. It could be a compact lab trying to force our hand. It could be a third species that thinks it can sell weather to both sides." Reed looked at the terms again, at the signature line at the wall. "We go to Nexus," she said. "We keep the math in our pocket and off the floor, and we hope that when a bell rings in a star, it doesn't sound like an answer to men who love answers more than children." Nor capped her pen, "And if someone rings it anyway," Reed almost smiled and didn't, "then we will teach them the difference between a warning and a war." Outside, the rain thickened. Somewhere under Luna, Lieutenant Kim wrote a parser for a dialect of numbers not yet spoken. On Hush Harbor, Osai took the picture of her sister from the drawer, slid it into the pocket over her heart, and stood when the order came to burn dark toward Nexus. Marble remembers footsteps better than it remembers speeches. The chamber on Nexus Prime waited, oculus open to a sky that still believed it could script the light. A woman from a fast species and a soldier from a slow empire walked toward it at the speed of machines, trailed by the ghosts of children and the arithmetic of adults. And somewhere in the Cyclades, a star tried to decide what kind of bell it wanted to be. The chamber on Nexus Prime had always been a theater of certainties. Marble columns carved 3 millennia ago spoke of permanence. Vaulted ceilings bore murals of victories so old their descendants no longer remembered which planet had bled. When the conclave convened now, the marble was cracked, and the murals had been covered with screens flashing evacuation warnings. The air smelled faintly of ozone from too many comm relays powered up at once. High Marshal Jarre stood where history once stood and tried not to notice that half the seats were empty. Those who remained wore fear like borrowed clothing, too large, too visible, too easy to tear. Envoy Thales spoke first, voice hoarse with weeks of defensive rhetoric. "They offer terms that unmake us. Disarmament, trials, corridors of neutral space we cannot patrol. They demand we confess guilt for Elysium Ridge, as if a demonstration of power is not the language every empire has spoken. To sign is to dissolve the compact into obedience." "Refusing," said Admiral Urath of the Crystalline Assembly, her translucent features trembling with the glow of exhaustion, "is to invite extermination. Look at the map. 60% of our fleet capacity gone, refugees in orbit around every core world, factories infected with nanites we cannot excise. They own our communications. They own our fear." General Threx slammed his claws on the table, sparks flying from chitin and stone. "Surrender to primitives who crawled into the stars 2 centuries ago. Better to die with dignity than live as livestock." "Dignity is not inheritance," the humanitarian minister replied quietly. "It is a choice, and right now our children cannot eat dignity." The debate circled, rhetoric sharpening into blades dull with overuse. Jarre let them argue, his mind replaying the message from President Reed. The calm assertion that justice was not negotiation, it was consequence. He thought of Elysium Ridge, of the lavender trees and children melted into glass. He remembered his own cadet days, reciting codes of honor that had felt eternal. He wondered if eternity could survive hunger. Across the galaxy on Earth, Reed prepared for departure to Nexus. Admiral Hale read the Cyclades relay report again, the Starquake induction that no one claimed. "A sun that rings like a bell," he murmured. "Somebody is trying to teach us both fear and restraint." Or, Nor suggested, they're trying to prove that restraint has already been lost. The delegation left under escort heavier than any in human history. Stealth carriers flanked them in probabilities, not coordinates. Quantum frigates lurked in flux, waiting for orders no one wanted to give. Reed carried with her not just terms, but a memory. Children on a field trip, a bell that rang, a world that turned to ash. She intended to place that memory on the marble floor and let the compact decide if it could still breathe under its weight. When she arrived, the conclave rose out of tradition, not respect. She spoke without raising her voice. "You asked for obedience. You enforced it with fire. You thought we would fold under the same rules that bound you. You were wrong. The question now is not whether we can fight you, we can. The question is whether you can imagine a galaxy where law is consequence, not ceremony." For a moment, silence held. Then Thales barked, "We will not kneel." "No," Reed answered softly. "You will stand, and you will stand accountable. That is the only dignity left." Outside, orbit shimmered with fleets, some human, some compact, all waiting to see if marble or fire would speak louder. The bell in Cyclades was still ringing in their minds, a reminder that stars could be taught to scream. History hovered, indecisive, listening for which grammar would define the next century. Operation Lantern began as an idea on a napkin. Colonel Tran had scrawled 3 words, "Truth is viral," and circled them twice. Now, months later, the operation unfolded across compact space like a second sunrise. Human broadcasts poured through every unsecured channel, not as taunts but as mirrors. On the agricultural moon of Varus, farmers tuned in expecting weather updates and instead saw footage of compact admirals ordering the bombardment of Elysium Ridge. On the factory world of Tin, workers received videos of their own leaders preparing Sable Crown, a Starkill device wrapped in rhetoric about salvation. On dozens of refugee stations, children heard human voices speaking their languages with careful accents, promising food convoys escorted by ships that did not vanish into the dark. The effect was not immediate. Pride resists facts the way stone resists water. But stone wears. Crowds gathered, first in whispers, then in chants. On 3 worlds, governors refused to send conscripts. On 2, commanders lowered shields to let human relief fleets through. On 1, a mob stormed a military archive and broadcast its contents to every neighboring system, proof that their own strategican had lied about losses for months. Compact leaders screamed, "Propaganda." Citizens answered, "Evidence." When your children are hungry, the source matters less than the meal. Meanwhile, human fleets tighten the cordon. Osai's Hush harbor ghosted along the borders of Zephyr Prime, marking vectors for relief drops even as she tracked enemy patrols. Elia Stone's Arcadia's Edge reported another shipyard collapsing under nanite sabotage, this one so corroded that a half-built cruiser disintegrated on launch. Prometheus prototypes flickered through quantum states, appearing and vanishing like rumors of gods. Admiral Hale convened his staff. "They are unraveling. Another 6 weeks and their cohesion will be smoke. The temptation will be to strike now, to burn the core and be done. But victory isn't annihilation. Victory is a galaxy that remembers Elysium Ridge not as precedent, but as warning." Reed nodded. "The longer we hold discipline, the more their people see the difference, not beasts, not butchers, builders who refuse to let graves write the law." Nor added, "And yet we must be vigilant. Power teaches arrogance faster than defeat teaches humility." In the Strategican, Jar stared at reports of riots, defections, supply collapse. His staff urged escalation. "Unleash Sable Crown," one general hissed. "If they can ring a star, we can silence it." "No," Jar said firmly. "Weapons that unmake the sky leave nothing for survivors to inherit. If we choose extinction, it will be with bare hands, not the death of sons." Some called him coward, some called him traitor. He did not answer. He only looked again at the footage of children melted into glass and felt the echo of Reed's words. Dignity is not inheritance. It is a choice. The lanterns burned. The void filled with light not of explosions but of revelations. For the first time in 3 millennia, the Compact's people looked at their leaders and asked aloud, why? And questions once voiced are harder to silence than guns. The war faction within the Compact made one last gamble. They gathered what fleets remained, patched cruisers, half-finished dreadnoughts, armed freighters, and named the armada the Crown of Stars. They broadcast oaths of final victory, promising their citizens one decisive strike that would restore dignity. Secretly, they carried Sable Crown in their holds, a device meant to force the galaxy into obedience by collapsing an entire sun. Human intelligence knew before the fleet had left dock. Lieutenant Kim's code-breaking team decrypted the orders within hours. Vasquez's analysts confirmed the payload's physics, unstable, reckless, a weapon that might destroy the wielder faster than the target. Reed gathered her counsel. If they deploy it, they will kill not only us but themselves. The lesson will be annihilation. We cannot allow it. Admiral Hale drew vectors across the map. We'll intercept in the Asterian expanse. Stealth squadrons will cut escorts. Prometheus class will handle the flagships. Osai's corvette group will disable transports. Minimal civilian casualties. Nor whispered, minimal is still not none. The fleet deployed. In the expanse, the Crown of Stars advanced in formation, banners glowing as if ceremony could shield them. On board, General Threx roared speeches about destiny and supremacy. The crews listened, half in faith, half in hunger. The battle began in silence. Quantum mines detonated inside destroyers, leaving wreckage that looked like coincidence. Prometheus frigates flickered into existence long enough to loose torpedoes, then vanished before sensors could track them. Osai's Hush Harbor darted through escorts, cutting comms with precision strikes, leaving ships deaf and blind. In the flagship, General Threx demanded activation of Sable Crown. Engineers protested. The device was unstable, still untested. Glory requires risk. Threx spat and ordered the ignition sequence. They never finished it. Captain Stone's Arcadia's Edge dropped out of cloak inside the flagship's sensor blind zone and unleashed a spread of quantum penetrators. The device detonated prematurely, consuming the flagship in a bloom of impossible light. Half the Crown of Stars vanished instantly, the other half broke formation in panic. Within hours, the armada was wreckage. Human ships collected survivors where possible. Reed ordered all transmissions of the battle to include one fact. The Crown had died by its own hand, undone by arrogance, not by fate. On Zephyr Prime, riots became open revolt. Citizens stormed palaces, tore down banners, chanted for food, not honor. The strategic and fractured. Some demanded surrender, others called for scorched earth defense. Jar said nothing, only watched the Crown's funeral pyre burn across every channel. Honor, he murmured, cannot feed the dead. The surrender took place 6 months after Elysium Ridge burned. Nexus Prime's marble chamber, once theater of law, now held human guards and weary alien delegates. Reed stood at the same podium where Thales had once demanded obedience. Now she read the terms of surrender. The Triune Compact dissolves its military forces. Its commanders will face tribunals for crimes against civilians. Civilian populations will receive relief, not punishment. Refugees will return home under escort, and every child in your worlds will grow up knowing not obedience but consequence. Kalara, who had once sneered at human speed, signed first. Her hands trembled, the signature barely legible. One by one the others followed. Thales hesitated longest, then pressed their seal with a hand that shook with more rage than strength. Jar stood aside, watching silently, a soldier who knew history does not grant absolution, only memory. Outside, 3,000 human ships orbited Nexus Prime, not firing, not threatening, simply present. The weight of survival turned visible. Refugee convoys streamed past them, escorted by human frigates carrying food, medicine, engineers. Relief ships landed on worlds once starved of truth, now starved only of grain. The tribunals began. Admiral Korvac stood trial for the genocide of Elysium Ridge. His defense, that it was a demonstration, not a massacre, crumbled under footage of children's playgrounds melted into glass. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Others followed, some condemned, some spared, all weighed against justice that refused to forget. Integration began cautiously. Schools taught human languages alongside alien ones. Relief councils paired human officers with local administrators. Nor reminded Reed often, "Conquest is easy, justice is work." Reed listened even as senators at home clamored for faster assimilation, greater tribute. 5 years later, the galaxy had changed. Former compact worlds flew new flags. Trade routes pulsed with goods and ideas. Some species integrated eagerly, others bitterly, a few clinging to exile on reservation worlds. The marble chamber on Nexus Prime housed the new Galactic Assembly, its walls scarred but still standing. Reed stood at its podium again, older now, hair silvering at the edges, and delivered the first State of the Galaxy address as President of the United Galactic Republic. 5 years ago, they tried to teach us our place with fire. We answered with survival, but survival is not enough. Justice is not enough. We must build a galaxy where memory is the teacher, not arrogance, where children can walk under trees without fearing orbit, where law is consequence, not ceremony, where dignity is not inheritance, but choice. The delegates, human and alien alike, listened in silence. Some believed, some resented, all remembered. Outside, the stars burned indifferent. But somewhere, in a field on Elysium Ridge rebuilt from glass to soil, lavender trees grew again. Children ran beneath them, their laughter ringing like a bell that warned and promised at once. Never again.